Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
The show you are listening to was recorded some years ago. Therefore, please disregard any days or dates that may not be applicable to today's time. We hope you enjoy the program. You're listening to the Tamar Yonah Show here on Israel News Talk Radio. Israel's War of Independence, 1947 to 1949, Israel was fighting. According to Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in human terms, the War of Independence was Israel's costliest war, with over 6,000 Israelis that were killed and 15,000 wounded. The war consisted of 39 separate operations fought from the borders of Lebanon to the Sinai Peninsula and Eilat, where Israel was attacked by 5 Arab nations. And it wasn't just the Arabs who were working against a Jewish state. It was also the British who were in charge of the mandate in Palestine. Again, there was no Palestinian country. Palestine was an area, just as the Sahara Desert is an area, but not a country. The British were ruling in this area. Their mandate had ended, and Israel was fighting in order, or I should say the Jewish people in the land of Israel were fighting for their independence, and the Arab armies were going to destroy them, even though there was a vote in the United Nations where the Jewish people could finally have their own state. However, the Arabs were adamantly against this, and they opened up warfare against the Jews in the land of Israel. So who exactly did Israel gain independence from? Who fought in the War of Independence? How did Israel win the war in 1948? On this show, I will be interviewing a few people who lived in the time of the establishment of the State of Israel, before and after. You are going to be hearing firsthand accounts of what it was like being a teenager in those days and fighting not only for a state, but for your own survival. The show you are listening to was recorded some years ago. Therefore, please disregard any days or dates that may not be applicable to today's time. We hope you enjoy the program.
Tonight is Israel Memorial Day for the fallen soldiers, to be followed by the joyous occasion of Israel Independence Day. We're going to hear tonight a few people who lived in Israel back in the days just before its independence. What was it like living as a teenager back in 1948? What were their experiences? And what was the atmosphere like back then? We have on the phone with us Ben-Tzion Chavula from Haifa, who remember well the fight for independence, something that even today we're still fighting for. We have Ben-Tzion Chavula from Haifa on the line with us. Good evening.
Good evening.
So you were around the time of the 1948 War of Independence, both of you. You were both born in Israel, I understand.
Correct.
What was it like during that time period?
At that time, mainly, I remember the main memory when I was at that age. When the War of Independence broke out. I was 17 years old, and we were at school, of course. And although most of the enlisted men were 18, we were released of our school. We were in the last grade to enable us join our friends with the fighting. Because of our younger age, we were not put into the front lines, but mainly on assisting assignment.
Were your parents afraid of you to go at such a young age to the army?
I believe yes, but they didn't show it. Particularly, I mean, in my family, they did not show it. But I know of other friends of mine who intervened with the authorities and tried to prevent their children to go up in the front.
Chavula, were you drafted into the army at that time?
Oh no, I was only 14 years old, and my memories are. I was only 14 years old, and my memories are memories of a young girl. So, of course, I was not drafted.
You were too young to be drafted.
Yeah, but my father was. And since we were living in Ramatayim, which was about 30 kilometers from Tel Aviv, he was sent to protect a kibbutz named Ramat HaKovesh. But I remember very clearly brothers of friends, neighbors who were killed in the
fighting
in the war. I remember, for example,
it's crying. Let me intervene in the meantime. My main memory was that we were, since we were very young in Israel, we were taught that we will not be able to be relying on other forces to protect us. I mean, they would be you are now in a unborn yet, but soon to be born state, and it would be your responsibility to protect yourself, protect the country. So from the age of 14, we were already in the Haganah, which is the self-defense forces prior to the military, like Tzahal today. And we were taught to use a gun and a pistol and to protect and fight.
What kind of guns did you have in those days?
Mainly old vintage guns from World War I and II. Actually, this was the only weapons that we used to have: guns and stand guns. And
were there enough guns to go around to everybody?
What's that?
Were there enough guns for everybody?
Well, there were very few indeed.
So what did the people fight with that didn't have guns?
They were fighting. I mean, the elite troops who were fighting were given the guns. The one that were in other assignments actually used sticks and things like that.
I'm sorry?
The other group, the other parts of the military who were in the back were using sometimes only sticks and things like that.
Was the situation, in your opinion, worse than it is today in Israel?
I don't think so. It was very bad. Let me explain. The whole population in Israel at that time was about 600,000 people. We were a very few in compare to the oncoming armies of the Arabs. You know, 7 nations were advancing on our borders with tanks and with guns, big guns, and with airplanes, and it was a real scary. While we were only equipped with handguns. So this was, it was bad, very bad, like today. Today, of course, it's different, because today we have suicide bombers who are penetrating beyond the borders to our cities, and this is a very, I wouldn't say scary, but very unsafe situation all over.
Chavula, what's your opinion on that?
You know, while talking to you, I just remembered a terrible situation when I was a kid, when 30 boys were fighting and were caught by the Arabs. 29 of them were slaughtered. It's something that I didn't want to remember all those years. One of them, he was a shoemaker, a refugee from Germany. They let him go to tell what happened.
The Arab let him go.
The Arab let him go so he can tell what happened. They were buried in one grave, in a they call it a brother grave, something like that. All of them together because they couldn't separate them.
How were they killed? Were they shot? Were
They were shot and
They were slaughtered.
Mm-hmm.
So
Was this during the War of Independence or beforehand?
During the war.
Mm-hmm. Which forces were there? Were these the Egyptians?
No, the Jordanians.
The Jordanians.
Yeah. I don't know why I'm so
excited.
Not excited.
Emotional
suddenly. Yesterday I talked to you, and it was fine, and suddenly I don't know what happened. Anyway, tomorrow, the Memorial Day is a very difficult day for me, for everybody.
Let me intervene, please. Okay?
Of course.
My memory of the War of Independence, for example, one of them, there were a lot of them, was we were enlisted into the army, and there was no distinction between healthy and non-healthy boys. Everybody wanted to go into the front. For example, a friend of mine, 18 years old, Reuven Green, he had a very bad eyesight. Today, he would never have a chance to be enlisted into the army. But at that time, everybody wanted to be on the front. And he involved in a battle. There was a armored truck convoy that was ambushed in the Galilee. And there was a small column, maybe 6 or 7 trucks. They were overwhelmed by the thousands of Arabs who fought with them all day. And during the night, when night fell, the commander told the survivor, very few survivors, there were 40 of them, only 6 survived, to run for each one for himself. But he, with his bad eyesight, ran directly into the direction of the Arabs, and they killed him.
Oh no, oh no.
אתה יכול לספר גם את סיפור השיירה ליחיעה?
זאת השיירה.
זאת השיירה.
For example, what I wanted to impress on you is that at that time, like today actually, everybody, most of the majority of the youth, of the young boys, saw it as their responsibility to be with the military and fight for the country.
How was it with the immigrants that came in from the Eastern Oriental countries and the European countries after the Holocaust?
Okay, there were several stories.
Well, it depends if you mean in the war or generally.
I mean, in the army, people had to understand commands. When someone said to duck, they had to know what the word meant. They had to learn how to use weapons, and they had to understand.
Oh, no,
how did they get along?
Well, there was a story, a real one, that in Latrun, which is on the way from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a big delegation or a group of newcomers from the Holocaust, youngsters, came, and upon this boarding from the ship, they were brought to a to an army camp where they trained for a day or so. They were given guns and they were sent to the fighting because there were not enough people to fight, and most of them fell on the field.
Most of them fell in the field.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
We're coming to a break, so we have to stop here. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Tamar Yonah Show.
We have Ben-Tzion Chavula from Haifa on the line with us. So how was it with the immigrants that came in from the Eastern Oriental countries and the European countries after the Holocaust? Someone who had a different culture, a different mentality, a different language.
My memory of this problem is a bit different. I remember that the new immigrants who came from the Holocaust, mostly without families, young. I'm talking about young boys who were drafted into the military. My particular remembers is with the Air Force. I served with the Air Force, and they were glad to be there because the Air Force became a home for them. And they learned the language, they learned a profession, which they used later in their life in Israel, and they were quite happy there. And we, the Israeli-born technician soldiers, had very good relations with them, as a matter of fact.
Did most of these immigrants stay on in the army afterwards?
Yes, because they were, you see, the Israeli-born soldier or technicians had where to go after the war has ended, back to schools, back to the home. They had a home. They started higher education at the Technion, the universities. They had no choice but to stay at with the military. Mm-hmm. So they stayed, and actually they were the backbone of the Israeli Air Force for many years.
Did you ever consider did the thought ever entertain did you ever consider losing the war?
No.
The possibility?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So your morale was very high. You were going to fight and you were going to win. There was no defeat.
No. But we are never afraid. I mean, this question, to the people up front in the military, there was we were not afraid. We were sure that we will win, and we were very, שמחנו על המפקדים שלנו. How do you say? We trusted our commanders, who some of them were really good ones, and we knew that we will win.
Where did you get your weapons from?
Well, before the war, the Haganah and the other group of fighting people were buying it in some, how do you say it, clandestine, how do you say it?
Mm-hmm, right.
Ways in Europe, in the United States, and being brought to Israel in some in ships, in airplanes, forgot how to say it. Anyway, after the war, after the independence, rifles and weapons and guns were bought in Europe and were brought to Israel legally.
What were your feelings about the British?
Mixed feelings. I tell you why. Number one, we owe them a lot for building Palestine into a Western type state. I mean, roads and railways and police stations and the law in Israel, you know. Mm-hmm. And they made us a country. On the other side, they prevented the immigrants to come to Israel because of the pressure from the Arab countries. So there was the last days of their regime in Israel was a fight with them.
Is there any special memory that you would like to share before we finish?
About
your time during or before, right before the War of Independence?
Look, I was a child. The atmosphere was. I remember the atmosphere of big hope that finally we are going to have a country, a moledet. How do you say? A state, a moledet. How do you say a moledet?
Homeland.
A homeland. That's right. And that everybody, every Jew could come and immigrant here. Actually, we thought that everyone will come, but it didn't turn out this way. Never mind. But the atmosphere.
We're still waiting for everybody to come.
Yeah, still. But I remember the atmosphere. I remember. You see, I cried because suddenly the memories of the boys came back. But actually, the stronger memories are of big hope.
I remember the War of Independence as a time of, as my wife said, great hope and great expectations. And the morale was very high, although the casualties were also very high, because we know that we knew that we are going to have a state eventually, and life will be changed dramatically all over. And that was really a very, very hopeful time at that time.
Well, we all have to pray.
We pray.
And roll up our sleeves and fight. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Bye-bye.
Be well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We're talking tonight to people that served the 1948 War of Independence. What was it like then? How were they able to fight with the few arms that they had? We have Shabtai Katz on the phone. Shabtai served in the Israeli Air Service, not yet even called the Israeli Air Force. Good evening, Shabtai.
Good evening.
Why don't you start out by telling us how old you were during the War of Independence in 1948, just beforehand, actually?
I have been 17 years old, and I can tell you that I was studying in Tel Aviv in Montefiore School. It's a high school. And nearby, Montefiore Street, number 9, I think, there was a Israeli club. And I was a member of the Israeli club. So they sent me, Aviation Club, yep. And they sent me to Tel Aviv, to the airport of Tel Aviv. The British were still in the airport. So I joined them and I worked on Chevrat Aviron aircraft.
While you were in high school?
At the end of high school, yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to go forth and back, and since there was a war going on, I didn't go from Rehovot to Tel Aviv. I was sleeping in Tel Aviv. And while I was in the airport of Tel Aviv, I was the only one that I stayed there during the night, and I was guarding at Sheikh Munis, where the university is now. There was still Arabs, and they were shooting down to the airfield.
Now, you didn't come home at night because it was too dangerous?
Too dangerous.
Where were they shooting at you? What would happen? How was it dangerous?
In Mishmar HaShiv'ah and Beit Dagan, and there were still Arabs there, and they were shooting on the bus of Drom Yehuda. And
I'm assuming that the British were still in power then.
The British were still in Israel.
And they didn't do anything when the Arabs were shooting?
No.
So did Jewish people complain and it was just ignored, or the Jewish people didn't even complain at that time because they knew nothing would happen?
They complained, but it didn't help much. They tried to what we call ways of action. They went different ways to Agrobank. Today it's called Chulon. And they went to Tel Aviv. And bypassing Beit Dagan and Mishmar HaShiv'ah. And it was called Mishmar HaShiv'ah because there were 7 Notrim killed there during that period.
Did you have a telephone?
Yeah.
Were you able to contact your parents? Where were you born?
I was born in Germany.
Did your parents, did they make it to Israel?
And we left after my father was caught by the Nazis, and then he decided that we are running away from Germany. We went to Switzerland, from there to Italy, and Martha Washington, the ship, took us to Jaffa.
What year was that?
That was 1933, end of 1933. And then, since my mother had a brother in Rehovot, we moved to Rehovot, and at the beginning, we were in the kibbutz, and then we were renting a house, and after some time, we decided that we are building our own home.
Did you have problems getting a permit to come into Israel, into Palestine at that time?
Yes, we had a problem.
What did you do?
My mother didn't get the permit because she had already a child, and they said that she would get the permit if she wouldn't have been married and she wouldn't have had children. But we decided that we're coming in, and that's it. We came in, I think it was the 5th Aliyah.
So you were registered in a new passport as a Palestinian.
Yeah, right.
How did the Arabs feel about that? Were they identifying as Palestinians then, or were they identifying as just another Arab tribe or Arab nationality?
I don't think that there was any special problems. I know that in 1936 and 1939 there were Moraot, and they were in Hebron, also in Tel Aviv, Jaffa. But when we came in, there was no problem. And as I said, we moved to Rehovot, and there I was studying in the elementary school, and later on high school I went to Tel Aviv.
We have to take a break, but we'll be back after the news. Stay with us.
The show you are listening to was recorded some years ago. Therefore, please disregard any days or dates that may not be applicable to today's time. We hope you enjoy the program.
We're talking tonight to people that served the 1948 War of Independence. What was it like then? How were they able to fight with the few arms that they had? We have Shabtai Katz on the phone. Shabtai served in the Israeli Air Service, not yet even called the Israeli Air Force. When did you get drafted into the Army?
During the period that I was studying in the high school.
Did you want to go?
Yes.
Did everybody want to go?
Yes.
They did. So your morale was high. You wanted to fight for a new state.
Very high, and I can say that we were, I think at that period, something like 600,000 Jews in Israel, but all of them were really united and like one fist.
Were you afraid?
No, I'm not the type that they are afraid.
Okay. What about your parents? Were they afraid to have you go to fight?
I guess mother was worried all the time.
Mm-hmm, just like mothers do.
Yeah.
So where did you go into the Army? What?
At the beginning, I went to a corporal course, and I was with Gur. He was the Ramatkal of...
Motagur?
Motagur. And I was in Givat Brenner, and then we moved to the Negev. And from there, I was called back to Sde Tel Aviv, and I joined the Israeli Sherut Avir, the Air Service.
The Air Force. Mm-hmm.
Air Service, it was called at the beginning.
I see.
And after that, I think something like 6-8 months, it was called the Air Force.
What kind of planes did you have to fight with?
At the beginning, we had the Tiger Moth and Osters and Rapid, all kinds of light aircraft. We used to to throw out through the door the bombs, and if there was no pilot, then I would fly with them to Gush Etzion or to Jerusalem, all those places where the pilots needed someone to throw out the bombs.
So you would go up in the air with the pilots and throw bombs down. What kind of bombs did you have?
Oh, local made.
Meaning what?
Something like...
Molotov cocktail type things?
No. It was bombs made out of pipes, welded at the ends, put in, and it was exploding. It had a detonator, and I was pulling out the detonator and throwing down. I think we threw the bombs from something like 400 feet.
I was wondering, you'd have to be pretty low. And did you get shot at?
Yes, they were shooting at us, and I remember 2 cases, but then I didn't fly. I was in Tel Aviv. One pilot came back, and he said that we were shooting at him, and he was hit in the strut that was holding the wing. I looked at it, and then I found out that actually the co-pilot that was shooting from a Bren, he shot himself, and he was excited from that, and then he came back to Tel Aviv, and we found it. We changed the strut, and the airplane was the next day serviceable.
Where did the pilots come from? I'm sure that the British didn't let you go up in planes before the war and practice.
I will tell you, there was, I would call it the Haganah, sent some of the good boys to study flying, and some of the good boys as mechanics. Now they were...
You're talking about outside of Israel. They would send them to another country.
No, that was the next part. When Shirut Avir was already established, then they sent to Italy and to Zatech, to Czechoslovakia.
Mm-hmm.
But at the beginning, they were flying in Ramle, where today the Pikud Aoref is. And there was a runway there, and they used to fly there.
How many planes would you say that the air service had in those days?
I think something like 7 to 10 airplanes altogether.
That was the whole Air Force, basically.
Yeah, the Shirut Avir, and I would say that Ziloni, he bought some 20 broken Osters from Akir. Today it's called Tel Nof. And at that time, we moved those airplanes to Tel Aviv, to the Kiryah in Sarona. And there we repaired the airplanes, we made them fly, and I was part of the test flight. I used to fly with them, and I would say the man in charge was Ish Shalom, Freddy Ish Shalom. He ran away from the British Air Force, and he joined the Israeli Shirut Avir and then the Air Force.
But you were up against other nations, other Arab nations that had hundreds and hundreds of airplanes.
Yes.
Did you find yourself in air battles with other airplanes?
I will tell you, after Sarona, they moved me to Squadron 101, and in that squadron there were the Messerschmitts. The Messerschmitts were the fighter airplanes. The Egypt Air Force sent down Dakotas that took off probably from El Arish and were throwing bombs on Rehovot and Tel Aviv. And at that time, Modi Alon, he shot down 2 Dakotas, Egyptian Dakotas, and at that period, I think they stopped sending airplanes to bomb.
Did you have a force that was anti-aircraft in those days?
Yes, we had it was the Beza machine gun, and most of it, I think something like 37 Bezot were in Israel, and they used to shoot on those aircraft, but I don't know if really they hit them. I know in Tel Aviv, once the Spitfire was shot down by Nathan. It was a Gentile that joined the Shirut Avir and then the Air Force for 2 years, something like this. He was a Gachal, I think, Yus Chutz Laaretz. We had two types. We had Machal, Mitnadvei Chutz Laaretz, and Gachal, Yus Chutz Laaretz. And those two helped us a lot.
What would you say was the scariest situation you were ever in during the war?
The scariest situation was when the British left Tel Nov, Akir it was called at that period, and we moved in, and Regiment 52 went out to clear Marar. It was an Arabic village. We had two Arabic villages, one Akir on the other side, the eastern side, and the west side we had Marar. When they went to Marar, we stayed two boys in Tel Nov, and from Akir they tried to attack us, but they were coming till the fence, shooting, and I was driving a car. I put out the lights, put them on again, and they thought that a lot of cars are traveling. We didn't shoot, and they were afraid to move. So they didn't come in, and they moved back.
Very clever. What about the overall feeling in Israel? Did people consider the possibility that the Jewish people would lose the war?
I think that the Arabs thought that the Jewish people will lose the war, and also the British had in mind that they are leaving, and now the Jews and the Arabs will quarrel, and then they'll have to come back to help the Jews or help the Arabs. But I would say that the Israelis were really united, and it was really excellent in behavior, in everything. Everybody was ready to give his life to make that country fit.
And many did.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. These were some of the men and women who made Israel a state, fought its wars, and saw their friends and relatives fall in battle. We owe a tremendous debt to those brave young men and women who aren't so young anymore but are thankfully still here to share their memories, creating the state that we now live in today. I'd like to thank Ben-Tzion Chavula from Haifa and also Shabtai Katz for giving us a taste of what it was like back in 1948. We thank all of those who fought and those who fell on this Remembrance Day, and I would imagine all of us will be celebrating Israel Independence Day with greater gratitude and hope for a free and strong Israel.
You've been listening to the Tamar Yonah Show here on Israel News Talk Radio. If you have any feedback on the show, feel free to write me. Tamar, Tamar, at israelnewstalkradio.com. Thanks for being with us.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the israelnewstalkradio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.